Harlem, New York. The Cotton Club is packed. Monday night, early autumn 1930. Over 200 guests fill the tables, mostly wealthy white folks from downtown, politicians in sharp suits, silver screen actors, and the black-suited society of Italians and Irish. On stage, Duke Ellington's band is playing a lively swing number, brass horns blending with drums that make the wooden floor vibrate faintly underfoot. Bootleg whisky flows nonstop, highball glasses sparkling under the black and white lights, cigarette smoke mixing with expensive perfume, and the arrogance of a class that believes all of New York revolves around them. Tonight, the Cotton Club is both the glitziest and the most dangerous spot in the city, a high-class theater where violence can erupt in a blink. Black folks are only allowed to serve and stand along the walls, but tonight there's one exception. At a table near the back of the room, almost hidden behind a pillar, Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson sits alone, nursing a bourbon and watching the show with his familiar quiet focus. He doesn't talk, doesn't try to make his presence known. He doesn't need to. Bumpy's stillness is enough to make anyone who's heard of him avoid looking too long. Nobody pays him special attention, or rather, everyone tries not to pay attention. And then, like every tragedy at the Cotton Club, that calm is shattered by a drunk who thinks he's invincible. Vincent Mad Dog Coll shoots up from his reserved table near the stage. His face is flushed red from Irish whiskey and the rage he's been building all evening. Just 22, but already one of New York's most notorious hitmen, Coll carries an impulsiveness and unchecked violence that once made him gun down an ice cream shop just because a guy looked at him too long. Tonight, he's fresh off a fat kidnapping score and swimming in victory booze. But what makes Coll's eyes light up isn't the liquor or the cash. It's the black man sitting alone at the back of the room. Bumpy Johnson, the rival Coll's been nursing a grudge against since 3 prior run-ins. One of Coll's runners once crossed into Harlem and threatened the wrong turf and got his arm broken by Bumpy's guys before being tossed back to Hell's Kitchen like a warning. Another time, Coll tried to kidnap a black grocer on 134th Street, only for Bumpy to block the door without a word, his expression enough to send Coll's whole crew running off in humiliation. And the third time, in a Hell's Kitchen bar, Coll snarled in front of the whole room, "One day, I'll make that colored boy kneel." He believed it. He believed skin color dictated rank in the underworld, that Harlem would eventually just be an extension of Irish territory. For months, the tension between Coll and Bumpy had simmered, waiting for a spark to explode. And tonight, at the Cotton Club, Coll just spotted the opportunity he'd been waiting for. Coll starts walking, cutting across the whole club toward Bumpy's table. His Irish bodyguards scramble after him, grabbing at his arms, whispering in panic, "Vinny, not here, not tonight." But Coll ignores them all. His body language, shoulders hunched, eyes bulging, steps staggering but aggressive, makes a wave of guests turn their heads. The music's building to its climax, but Coll advances with such menace that a few musicians falter. When Coll stops in front of Bumpy's table, the air in the Cotton Club feels like it's been sucked dry of oxygen. He doesn't lean down to whisper, doesn't lower his voice to keep up criminal civility. Coll bends over, slams his hand down on the table so hard, Bumpy's bourbon glass jumps and spills across the wood, and he bellows, loud enough to silence the whole room, "You uppity colored boy." The music cuts off instantly, like a knife slicing the air. The entire Cotton Club turns. Coll keeps going, his voice booming, venomous, raw in a primal way. "Negro trash, Harlem monkey." 200 people freeze. Some white guests let out shocked chuckles. Others gape in disbelief that anyone would spew such blatant hate in Harlem, even if the Cotton Club is still white-owned. The black servers hugging the walls clench their fists, forcing blank faces. Jim Crow might thrive on written and unwritten laws, but even in 1930, this was too much. But Bumpy Johnson doesn't stand up, doesn't draw the point. 3-8 he carries, doesn't get angry, doesn't show fear, doesn't frown. He just looks up at Coll with eyes so flat and black that a few people at nearby tables feel a chill down their spines. It's not the look of someone insulted, it's the look of someone hearing a death sentence meant for someone else. Coll keeps roaring, voice raspy from booze. "Say something, you filthy," and Bumpy speaks. His voice is low and steady, cold enough that some witnesses later described it as the scariest thing they'd ever heard. "You have 7 days to get all your men out of Harlem. After that, any white man I see running numbers in my turf dies. You want to humiliate me in public? Call me those names. Fine, that's your choice. But choices always have consequences. And the consequence of disrespecting Bumpy Johnson is your men start dying. Not getting beat, not getting arrested, dying. You have 7 days. Use them wisely." Coll throws his head back and lets out a laugh so loud a few glasses on the bar rattle. He laughs like he just heard the funniest story of the year. "7 days," he shouts. "This nigger's given me 7 days. You hear that, everybody?" Coll spins toward the whole club, playing it like a stage actor. "You all heard it. Bumpy Johnson, some no-name street nigger, thinks he can threaten Mad Dog Coll." He wheels back, leans in close to Bumpy's face. "In 7 days, you'll be working for me, or you'll be dead." Then he delivers the last line, cruel and naked as a cold blade. "Niggers don't beat white men. That's how the world works." Bumpy doesn't react, just picks up what's left of his bourbon, takes a final sip, stands slowly, and walks out. The crowd parts for him, like he's carrying a deadly plague. Bumpy leaves the Cotton Club, steps into Harlem's night without looking back. Coll watches him go, still smirking smugly. He heads back to his table, orders more drinks, and retells the story to anyone who'll listen, bragging that he just taught a Harlem nigger its place. That night, Mad Dog Coll goes to sleep believing he's won, that the Harlem feud is finally over. 6 hours and 43 minutes later, the first body is found on West 147th Street. And that's when all of New York starts to understand one thing. Bumpy Johnson never says what he won't do. That night, Harlem is like a living body jolted awake by a thunderous slap. From Lenox Avenue to 7th Avenue, every street corner, every brownstone stoop, every corner grocery still lit up whispers about what went down at the Cotton Club. Black men gather in smoky little bars, smelling of cigarettes and cheap dinners, murmuring in low, angry voices. Mad Dog Coll called Bumpy a colored boy. In Harlem, in the barber shops on 135th Street, customers in the chairs eye each other in the mirrors, shaking their heads, unable to believe a white guy from Hell's Kitchen would publicly trash Bumpy Johnson like that. In late-night churches, old folks clutching Bibles sigh and nod, as if they know that kind of blasphemy can't end well. They all say the same thing, like a prophecy passing on Harlem's breath. Bumpy's gonna handle it. Just wait. Bumpy Johnson leaves the Cotton Club unhurried, unshaken, without a backward glance. He walks down 142nd Street, like a shadow fused with the night, long coat, swinging with his steps, head slightly bowed, eyes bottomless. Cars pass by, but nobody sees him, not because he's hiding, but because he carries an aura that makes people instinctively look away. The story of that night can only be captured in one line. No anger, no shake, just calculating. Because in Bumpy's mind, the insult doesn't make him lose control. It just triggers a logical, cold, precise chain reaction, sharp as a scalpel. Bumpy understands Mad Dog Coll in the way only those born and bred in crime can. Coll isn't a gangster. He's a whirlwind who might kill someone just to watch their chest cave in. Coll once sprayed bullets into a crowded kids' ice cream shop because a rival crew was there. Result, a 5-year-old boy dead on the spot. He stood in the middle of 23rd Street in broad daylight, drawn his gun, and shot a man in the chest just because the guy looked at him wrong. The papers call him Mad Dog, not for the killing habit, but for his eyes when he kills, empty, thrilled, like a beast owning the hunt. Coll's philosophy is simple. Fear equals power. To him, sowing terror means claiming turf. And for years, that works, with white folks, spineless neighborhoods, scattered communities that can't protect themselves. But Harlem isn't like anywhere Coll's ever set foot, and that's his first strategic mistake. Coll thinks Harlem is just a black slum, a nigger shithole where a little bullying gets you paid. He doesn't get that Harlem, poor as it is a unified block, a shared heartbeat, a community where every kid, every mother, every man belongs to something bigger than themselves. Elsewhere, people might fear Coll's, but in Harlem, his insult becomes a rallying cry. Coll's second mistake stems from his blatant white arrogance. He believes skin color equals power. He thinks white automatically means respected, obeyed, bowed to. He doesn't know 1930. Harlem isn't 1920 Harlem. The Jazz Age years forged a new generation, more confident, better educated, with a stronger community. And especially, he doesn't grasp that in Harlem's underworld, there are black men, even the Italian mafia treads soft around. His third mistake, the fatal one, is insulting the wrong man, in the wrong place, at the wrong time. The Cotton Club isn't black turf. It's a white fortress in the heart of Harlem. There, where rules are written by white hands, Coll stands up and hurls at Bumpy Johnson words even the most bigoted wouldn't say out loud. And worse, over 200 witnesses, white and black, all heard it. He doesn't just disrespect Bumpy in public. He disrespects all of Harlem in front of people who'll carry the story across New York. Nobody calls a black man a Harlem monkey in the Cotton Club and expects it to blow over. Not in 1930. Not in Harlem. Not when the target's Bumpy Johnson. When Bumpy turns the corner onto 142nd Street, he pauses for a second under the dim yellow glow of a street lamp, looking south, where Hell's Kitchen's shadows stretch like a beast's belly. He thinks this ain't business anymore. He keeps walking. This is about respect. A cold wind snakes through the brownstones, but inside Bumpy is absolute stillness. Harlem's gotta be taught a lesson in blood, and he knows exactly where to start. Bumpy Johnson's apartment was on West 139th Street, a place that from the outside looked like nothing more than old stoops, black-painted iron railings, and faint yellow light spilling from the window frames. But anyone who'd lived in Harlem long enough knew it was one of the most discreetly guarded spots in the neighborhood, where any stranger lingering too long would instantly draw the attention of the entire block. When Bumpy opened the door and stepped inside, the 4 men standing around the old wooden table all looked up. Earl Needles Jackson, the wiry one with eyes sharp as needle points, Leon Quiet, Parker, a tall, silent black man. So quiet people wondered if he even knew how to speak. Willie Freeman, the team's silk-smooth driver, whose face always stayed calm as if nothing in the world could rattle him, and Cliff Iron Harris, the one with hands like sledgehammers, and a punch strong enough to cave in an adult man's face with a single blow. All 4 stood when Bumpy entered, but he gave a small gesture for them to sit back down. None of them asked about the Cotton Club. None needed to. The story had spread through Harlem so fast that every night breeze seemed to carry the echo of that insult. Bumpy took off his vest, hung it on a chair, then quietly poured himself a little bourbon. Without a word, he opened the black leather notebook on the table, flipped a few pages, and stopped on one single page. The four men exchanged glances. This wasn't an ordinary page. This was the death list. 12 names that had to die. Bumpy slid the notebook toward them. 12, he said, voice low and flat, no emotion. 12, and all in 7 days. Needles was the first to scan the list. He recognized several names right away. 4 of Coll's most loyal gunmen, guys who'd called themselves nigger hunters in Irish bars. 3 of Coll's protection collectors, running from Hell's Kitchen down to Riverside Drive. 2 specialists in extortion and kidnapping, the ones behind a string of terrorizing incidents in Harlem the year before. 2 bootleg liquor runners who supplied Coll's stock. And finally, the name that made the whole room skip a beat. Patrick Donnelly, Coll's trusted lieutenant, and the only real brains the man trusted. He wasn't just the right hand, he was the heart of Coll's. Bumpy let them finish reading before he spoke. "Why 12?" Willie asked, voice quiet but steady. Bumpy set his glass down. "Because those are the 12 roads Coll's uses to walk into Harlem. Cut them all," he said, "and he has no legs left to stand on." Then Bumpy began laying out the strategy, each word cold and precise as a surgical blade. Step 1, disappear. "From this moment," Bumpy said, "no one sees me for the next 7 days. Not at home, not on the street, not in any gambling room. I vanish completely." He looked at each man in turn. "Coll can't kill what he can't see. Step 2, kill them all on a countdown. 1 a day." Bumpy continued. "Not faster, not slower, no delays. Each body found on schedule. Each body carries a note." He repeated the phrase the whole of Harlem would soon dread. 1 down, 11 to go. 2 down, 10 to go, and so on until 12. Step 3, don't kill Coll's. He doesn't deserve it, Bumpy said. When he loses everyone, he'll know he's already lost. The air in the room thickened. No one spoke. Only the steady breathing of 4 men listening to the only person they trusted. Bumpy Johnson never yelled, never threatened. He just spoke, and when he spoke, things became real. By 5:30 a.m., the plan was framed. The list divided into 4 groups, 3 targets each. Needles got the hardest part. 2 gunmen and 1 kidnapper who'd kept Harlem awake for a month. Quiet Parker would handle 2 collectors and 1 liquor runner. Willie was in charge of transport, escapes, moving people in and out of prepped safe houses. Iron Harris would take the targets that needed work up close. They all knew the locations, habits, and schedules of every target. They planned escape routes, cars with swapped plates, temporary holding spots for bodies before dumping them at the right patrol times. They prepared paper and pencils for the countdown notes, handwriting untraceable, straight as a death mark. Every tiny detail, from the sound of a door opening, to the crack of a gunshot, to the exact time the garbage truck passed, was calculated down to the minute. At 6 a.m., Bumpy stood, grabbed his coat, and picked up a small suitcase. Needles spoke up. "Boss, where you goin'?" Bumpy looked at him for a second, then said, "Somewhere Coll won't think to look." He walked out the door, didn't look back, and disappeared down the dark stairwell so quietly that 3 seconds later, the room felt like he'd never been there. Willie closed the door. Iron Harris locked the bolt. Quiet Parker let out a long breath, as if Harlem was about to witness something it had never seen before. Because from that moment, Mad Dog Coll could search all of Harlem, tear through every alley, ask every man on all he'd get back was the silence of an entire community, the silence that comes before a bloodstorm. Bumpy Johnson had vanished, and 12 of Coll's men were about to enter the last week of their lives. Patrick Red Hanlon always believed he was untouchable in central Harlem. Every night, between 10 and 11, he drove his black Ford along the dusty streets from 133rd to 147th, collecting protection money, a route he'd run for 6 months without a single pushback. Red was pure Irish Hell's Kitchen, red hair like fire, hot head, and complete faith in the white rhetoric of the time. Niggers won't dare touch an Irishman. He said it over and over, even when drinking alone, as if his own arrogance was the shield that protected him from everything. That night, Red had no idea his words had been remembered by Harlem, and that they had made him the first name on the list of 12 who had to die. Around 11 p.m., Red finished his last collection round. He stuffed a wad of cash into his coat pocket, lit a cigarette with his lighter, and turned onto the quiet stretch of West 145th Street, a street he knew so well he could drive it blind. But in one blink of that night, everything changed. From the shadows behind a lamppost, an old sedan suddenly swerved out, forcing Red's car to the curb. 2 dark figures stepped out so fast, Red didn't even reach the gun under his seat. His car door was yanked open, and a fist the size of a sledgehammer smashed straight into his mouth, sending him sprawling back, blood pouring over his lips. Red tried to yell, but only a weak groan came out before he was dragged from the car like a worthless sack. He was taken to an abandoned warehouse on West 147th Street, one of the places Bumpy's people had quietly controlled for years. Thick walls, high windows, nothing heard from the street outside. The perfect place to send a message. When Red was thrown onto the cold concrete floor, he still tried to shout, "Do you know who I am?" But that only made the shadows around him go quieter. They didn't answer. They didn't need to. One of them, probably Iron Harris, grabbed Red's hand and began breaking each finger. Slowly, precisely, the crisp crack echoing in the silent room. Red screamed until his throat was raw, legs kicking, but every scream only made the next break colder and more deliberate. When the last finger was bent backward, Red barely had breath left to whimper. But the visit wasn't over. A small, short blade, sharp as a claw, began slicing shallow lines across his arms and sides, each cut non-lethal, but delivering pain Red had never imagined. And when a long nail was driven into his thigh, piercing muscle and twisted gently, Red knew he was going to die, but still begged, sobbing. He said he had no problem with Negroes, that he only worked for Coll, that he didn't know anything about what Coll said at the Cotton Club. But the men in that room weren't there to argue. They were there to cross a name off the list. Red took 2 final stabs to the ribs, deep enough to shatter his breathing. When all that was left in him were weak rasps, a cold blade sliced clean across his throat in one neat stroke, ending the agony in total silence. By 5 a.m., they stuffed his body into a large metal trash can, locked the lid, and wheeled it out back. At 6:23 a.m., a city sanitation worker lifted the lid to see why it was so heavy. He fell backward, screaming in horror at the blood-soaked corpse with a piece of paper pinned to the chest. The scrawled but clear message, 1 down, 11 to go, leave Harlem. The news spread like electricity. Police arrived within minutes, but their confusion was almost visible. They didn't know whose revenge this was, didn't know why a familiar Irishman had been executed like this. The underworld went quiet. Some whispered that only one man in Harlem could order something like this. And in Hell's Kitchen, when the word reached Mad Dog Coll, he lost it, smashed a bottle, screamed at his crew that this couldn't be Bumpy. That nigger wouldn't dare do another one. He roared. But the men around him, the ones who knew Harlem better, started to realize what Coll hadn't yet. The first body was just the opening act. Day 2 began with thin fog over Harlem River Drive, the Riverside Road, where trucks usually rolled through before dawn. Sean O'Rourke, the hitman known as Mad Dog Coll's left hand, leaned against the concrete railing, smoking an early cigarette and waiting for pickup info from a collector. He was confident. For years, no one had dared touch him. Even the Italians treaded lightly when O'Rourke's name came up. But O'Rourke didn't know that the night before, Patrick Red Hanlon's death had put his name next on the list. And in Harlem, once Bumpy Johnson put someone on the list, the rest was only a matter of time. At 5:42 a.m., 2 men in long coats stepped out from under the bridge's shadow. O'Rourke turned, but didn't have time to speak or reach for his gun. A single thwack, clean, final one bullet, straight into the back of the head from less than 6 feet. O'Rourke's body crumpled over the railing and slid onto the cold concrete. The 2 men approached, rolled him over to confirm he was dead, then pinned a small note to his coat pocket. Just 3 words in pencil strokes, straight as a blade. 2 down, 10 to go. By 6:10 a.m., an early jogger spotted the body and screamed for help. The news flew faster than wind. 2 bodies in under 24 hours, both close to Coll's. But day 3 was what made even the hardest in Hell's Kitchen look at each other without words. The 3rd body, Liam Burke, was found near noon in a narrow alley behind a laundry on 138th Street. Burke was the notorious kidnapper who'd beaten black men in the street just to send a message for Coll's. He'd said Harlem smelled like fear whenever he showed up. But that morning, Harlem only smelled blood. Burke had been stabbed 19 times with an ice pick, each wound spaced evenly from chest to stomach in a way that delivered one message only. This wasn't murder. This was judgment. The last 2 pierced his lungs, letting him die slowly over minutes, long enough to understand no one was coming. A paper pinned to his lapel. 3 down. 9 to go. But that wasn't the last body of the day. Late afternoon, when the caretakers of St. Mark's Church on Lenox Avenue went down to the basement after hearing strange noises, they found the body of Thomas Callahan, a hired gun who'd worked for Coll since the beginning. Callahan wasn't stabbed or shot. He was beaten to death with a nearly meter-long iron pipe, each blow so heavy his ribs snapped into pieces. He died with eyes wide open, as if he couldn't believe a black man would dare touch him in the safe space he'd always thought belonged to white men. On his chest was a small note. 4 down, 8 to go. 3 bodies in 2 days. 3 different ways to die. 3 identical messages, and all of them pointed to one name. Coll didn't want to say but couldn't ignore. Bumpy Johnson. In the dingy office in Hell's Kitchen, when word of Burke and then Callahan came in, Coll erupted. He slammed the table, hurled a bottle at the wall, cursed his men for doing nothing right. He yelled, "Find him. Find that monkey. Bring me his head." But Harlem didn't talk. Harlem didn't see. Harlem didn't hear. Many of the men Coll sent to ask around were turned away at the door. A few trusted Irish told Coll straight they wouldn't go into Harlem right now. It was a death wish. Coll offered cash bounties for Bumpy's hideout, but no matter how high, Harlem stayed silent as a midnight graveyard. No one betrayed Bumpy. No one cooperated with Coll, No one gave even a hint, and when the darkness of day 3 fell, the only thing Coll understood was that he'd stepped into a war he couldn't control, a war where his opponent didn't fear him, a war where Harlem had chosen sides the moment he opened his mouth and called Bumpy colored boy, and that was only the first 2 days. Day 4 began with a scene that left the entire New York underworld stunned. The 5th victim's death took place right in the middle of an Italian restaurant in Midtown, where golden light spilled over white tablecloth tables and the steady clink of knives and forks rang like a clock. Bootleg liquor dealer Marco Bellini, who still considered himself the lifeline supplying Coll, was having lunch with 2 partners when 2 black men walked in. At first, no one paid attention. They were dressed plainly, showing no sign of danger, until they walked straight to Bellini's table, stood on either side of him, and almost in unison, each drew a suppressed pistol. 2 shots. Clean, quiet, no scream. Bellini slumped onto the table, eyes wide open in utter shock. The surrounding diners hadn't even processed what happened before the 2 men holstered their guns and walked out slowly, as if they'd just paid their bill. On the tablecloth next to Bellini's body was a small note, 5 down, 7 to go. The news spread so fast that less than an hour later, the Special Police Task Force was dispatched to Brooklyn over another report, a man's body hanging from the wooden rafters of an old warehouse near the docks. This was the 6th victim, a collector named Rory Doyle, who had a habit of sneering at anyone who wasn't Irish. Doyle was strung up by a rope tied to a crossbeam, eyes bulging, mouth open as if he'd tried to scream but never got the chance. Beneath him, the flickering yellow street lamp made his dangling body sway like a warning to anyone stepping into Brooklyn. The first 2 patrol officers on scene stared at the note pinned to Doyle's belt, still fluttering in the sea breeze. 6 down, 6 to go. They stood frozen for a few seconds before calling for backup, because in that moment, they knew this wasn't just murder. This was a declaration of war, but Harlem wasn't done. That same evening, as the sun set behind the brownstones on Lenox Avenue, the 7th body was found. This time, it was Frankie "Bull" Cavanagh, one of the most brutal enforcers under Coll, the man who'd once broken 3 jaws just for late protection payments. He was discovered in a dark alley, just 1 block off Lenox Avenue. Frankie "Bull" wasn't shot or stabbed. He was beaten to death with bare hands, or rather, with fists like hammers, until his facial bones collapsed completely. The coroner later said the final blow to the temple was enough to kill a bull, fitting his nickname perfectly. Pinned to his shirt was the 3rd note of the day, 7 down, 5 to go. No one could any longer call these deaths random. 3 bodies in exactly 24 hours, 3 different locations, Midtown, Brooklyn, Harlem, but the same cold, precise organization and a message too clear to ignore. In the darkened room in Hell's Kitchen, Mad Dog Coll began to truly panic. He had never been afraid, never shaken, but that morning, even the hand holding his cigarette trembled slightly, something his closest men started to notice. Coll paced like a trapped animal, threw chairs at the wall, screamed curses at anyone who entered the room. He fired a shot into the wall just because the knock at the door was too loud. Each new body reported was another knife slicing into the illusion of invincibility he'd always carried. And what kept Coll awake, and he didn't sleep for 2 straight nights, was that not a single person in Harlem would give him even the smallest piece of information about where Bumpy Johnson was hiding. Harlem had sealed its lips. Harlem had chosen its side, and now the police began tailing Coll not to protect him, but because they feared the war between the two sides would turn into a bloodbath right in the heart of the city. By the end of day 4, all Coll could repeat like a man losing his mind was one sentence: "This can't be him. He can't do this." But Harlem had known the truth for a long time. Bumpy Johnson never says what he won't do. Day 5 began with a thick, acrid smell spreading along 138th Street, the stench of burning rubber mixed with hot metal that made early commuters cover their mouths as they passed. A black Packard sat in the middle of the street, like a dying beast, exhaling its final column of smoke, its steel frame warped from the heat. When the fire department put out the blaze, they found the 8th body, a bootlegger named Danny Costello, who used to brag that he wasn't afraid of any black racket because Coll's got my back. But Coll hadn't protected him the night before. Costello had been tied to the steering wheel, the car doors locked from the outside, and the fire started behind the driver's seat, a method clearly designed to give the victim no chance of escape. Almost nothing remained for identification except the silver lighter he always carried, half melted on a pile of charred ash. No note this time, because the burning Packard itself in the middle of the street was the message. But that was only the first body of the day. That afternoon, as the sun slanted over Harlem's dark brown rooftops, kids playing stickball on the sidewalk of 141st Street heard a heavy thud from a nearby 3-story building. At first they thought someone dropped furniture, but when they approached, they saw a body crumpled on the concrete, arms twisted as if he'd tried to grab something before falling. This was the 9th victim, a collector named Mickey O'Brien, who'd heard about the 8 deaths before him and panicked so badly he tried to climb to the roof to hide. But Harlem didn't let him hide. He was pushed off the edge of the building. No knife, no gun, just one precise shove that sent him falling. 3 stories, neck snapped the instant he hit the ground. On the 3rd floor window, someone had left a note fluttering in the wind, low enough for the police to see 9 down, 3 to go. By the end of day 5, the whispers in Harlem bars no longer asked who's next, but only when does it reach the heart of Coll, and day 6 answered that question more brutally than any day before. In the morning, police received a report of a body dumped in an alley next to the Apollo Theater. When they arrived, they found the 10th, Eugene Malone, one of Coll's oldest and most seasoned lieutenants. He had been garroted with piano wire, a silent but utterly effective execution method, like the old Italian mafia hits. Malone lay sprawled on the ground, eyes bulging, face purple. No signs of struggle. The killer had to have gotten close, quiet, and fast enough to catch him off guard. The note was placed right on his chest, handwriting even and cold. 10 down, 2 to go. But Harlem wasn't finished. Less than 8 hours later, at 7 p.m., the 11th body was found in a cheap rented room in the Bronx. It was immediately clear this wasn't a normal death. The door was locked from the outside, the window barred with a wooden plank, and inside the room there was only a bed, a broken-legged chair, and the body of Sammy Red Eyes Kellen, who'd stood beside Coll in dozens of hits. His throat had been slit, a deep cut that sprayed blood all the way up the gray wall behind him. But what made the police go pale wasn't the wound. It was the note pinned right next to his head. 11 down, 1 to go. When the news reached Hell's Kitchen, Coll nearly broke mentally. He holed up in a damp safe house on 47th Street, sitting among empty bottles and a still-loaded gun. He called former allies, the Italian crews in Lower Manhattan, some Irish bar owners, even a few friendly cops, but every one gave the same answer: this is Harlem business. No one wanted to get involved in a war. Harlem had already picked sides in. No one wanted to protect a white man who'd brought the trouble on himself by disrespecting the one man the whole neighborhood respected. Coll threw the phone to the floor, screamed until his voice gave out. He shot the wall. He panted like a cornered animal. 7 days earlier, he'd laughed at Bumpy Johnson. Now he counted the dead on his own trembling fingers, and only one name remained on the list. Harlem knew it. Coll knew it, and Bumpy Johnson surely knew it better than anyone. Day 7 descended on New York with a deep purple sky and a thin mist creeping over the rooftops like a final warning. In a hidden corner of West 47th Street, where old buildings huddled together as if trying to escape the city's gaze, Mad Dog Coll hid in a safe house he believed no one knew about. But Coll didn't understand one thing. Harlem didn't need to know where he was. Harlem only needed to know where the last man under him was. And that evening, at 8:47 p.m., a woman appeared at the apartment door, hair neatly pinned, long coat, holding a small piece of paper. Her appearance was so ordinary that the guard at the door dropped his guard. "Sorry," she said in a soft, trembling voice. "I think I got the wrong apartment." The guard cracked the door to tell her she had the wrong address, and that was the moment everything ended. The woman's small hand tossed a short-necked glass bottle straight through the gap. The sharp crash of breaking glass told the guard what was coming. A blaze erupted instantly, red, fierce, swallowing the front of the apartment in a heartbeat. Screams rang out, followed by crashing furniture and exploding glass. The fire spread as if it knew exactly where to go. 2 of Coll's guards burst out the back door, choking on smoke, trying to run down the narrow alley to escape. But they didn't make it 3 steps before 2 dark figures stepped out from behind trash cans, each holding a sawed-off shotgun. 2 blasts, sharp, clean, final, and the 2 guards dropped to the cold brick, never understanding what hit them. Inside the apartment, flames licked the ceiling, red light flashing like a nightmare being peeled apart layer by layer. Amid the hissing fire and crackling wood, one figure smashed through a window. Patrick Donnelly, Coll's last lieutenant, the smartest and most loyal, the only one Coll trusted completely. Donnelly tried to climb out onto the ledge to escape the flames biting his back, his feet slipping on the sill, hands clinging to the burning frame. He looked down into the alley, and that was when the gunshot rang out. One bullet, just one, through his throat, making his hands release the wood. Donnelly's body dropped hard into the alley, blood from his neck spraying into the dust. When the firefighters arrived, they found on Donnelly's scorched clothing a note still intact, pinned tight with a small needle. It read, 12 down. Harlem belongs to Harlem. The news reached Coll less than 2 hours later. One of his men, trembling and pale, knocked on the safe house door to report. When he heard, "They got Donnelly," Coll didn't respond. He didn't yell. He didn't curse. He just stood there, white as death, then slowly sank into a chair, as if every ounce of life had been drained from him. The last lieutenant was gone. The one man he trusted had vanished like all the names before. And for Coll, that wasn't just losing a partner. It was losing the final shield between him and Harlem. Without waiting for morning, Coll stuffed a few wads of cash into his pockets, grabbed his gun, and stepped out into the street in near delirium. He didn't call his men, didn't warn anyone, didn't try to rally. He knew only one thing: if he stayed in New York one more night, he'd be the 13th body. A taxi pulled to the curb, and Coll practically threw himself inside, yelling, "Newark." The car sped off, leaving behind Hell's Kitchen's dim yellow lights, and a reminder the whole city would remember for years. Harlem doesn't forgive. Harlem doesn't forget. And the worst thing a white man can do is think he can disrespect Bumpy Johnson and walk away unscathed. The news of Patrick Donnelly's death spread across New York faster than fire engine sirens. Within hours, every bar, gambling den, and back room of speakeasies buzzed as if someone had cranked the city's volume to maximum. From Little Italy to the Bowery, from the Lower East Side to Brooklyn, everyone asked the same question. Can Mad Dog Coll survive this? Even the Irish underworld in Hell's Kitchen, men who'd once idolized Coll's brutality, didn't dare say his name too loudly. They whispered in the shadows, afraid one wrong word could make them the next target in a war the whole city recognized. This was no longer Coll against one gang. This was Coll against Harlem. As for Coll, the man who'd once stood in a bar, confidently declaring he'd make Bumpy Johnson kneel, he was now only a shadow of himself. When the taxi carried him out of Hell's Kitchen into the pitch-black night, the wind slapped the windows like New York's final slaps to his face. Coll didn't look back at Manhattan. He didn't dare. He just kept his head down, clutching the gun, as if it were the only thing keeping him from falling apart. By dawn, he'd crossed the Hudson River, hiding in a run-down boarding house in Jersey City, the musty smell clinging to the walls like the fear clinging to him. That was the closest he dared get to New York, and the farthest he'd ever felt from the power he once held. Because Coll knew something the fools still tried to deny, he would never set foot in Harlem again. The morning after, Harlem looked completely different, not because the streets had changed, but because the air had changed. Small-time numbers runners opened their shops earlier than usual. Men on street corners nodded to each other with the eyes of people who understood a new truth written in blood. But the strangest thing was no one saw Bumpy Johnson. No one knew where he was. No one knew where he'd gone for those 7 days. And no one asked. In Harlem, people learned an important unspoken rule. Sometimes a man's silence carries more weight than an entire city's screams. Whenever anyone mentioned the chain of 12 bodies, they said just one sentence and stopped, as if that was enough. This is Bumpy's Harlem now, not because Bumpy stood in the street flexing power, not because he gave orders or made declarations, precisely because he didn't need to. Harlem spoke for him, and all of New York listened. 3 days after Mad Dog Coll fled Manhattan, while people began debating whether he'd even survive the week or get clipped by the Italian mafia for bringing too much heat to the city, Harlem witnessed a sight so familiar, it stopped many in their tracks. Bumpy Johnson reappeared on Lenox Avenue. No entourage, no guns brandished, no sign he'd just orchestrated the 12 deaths that shook New York. He simply walked along Lenox like any other morning, hands in his coat pockets, slow measured steps, head slightly bowed, as if thinking about a Langston Hughes poem, completely silent, as if the 7 days before had never happened. But Harlem's reaction said everything. Men on corners nodded with wordless respect. Women outside grocery stores smiled at him, eyes relieved as if they'd reclaimed something that was theirs. Old folks on brownstone stoops quietly tipped their hats. Kids playing on the sidewalk paused, silent for a few seconds, then went back to their games, as if Bumpy Johnson's return made them feel safer. No one asked where he'd been for 7 days. No one asked what he'd done. Harlem understood the unwritten law. Some things gain more power the less they're spoken. Meanwhile, New York's press crowded outside newsrooms. That morning, headlines stretched across every newsstand like pieces of a new legend. 12 men dead in a week. bloody retaliation in Harlem. Mad Dog Coll defeated by Harlem's own Bumpy Johnson. The quiet power in Harlem. Political commentators whispered on the radio that a new line had been drawn between minority communities and the white underworld. The Italian mafia in Lower Manhattan conferred quietly. Those who once saw Harlem as easy pickings, now forced to reconsider. The news spread not through violence, but through the heavy silence of the Harlem community, and that created the social impact later called the Harlem Rule, an unwritten code every white gang had to respect. Never publicly disrespect black gangsters, never treat them as lesser, never invade Harlem with arrogance. If you do, the price will never be negotiation or apology. The price will be lives. After that week, very few white gangsters dared set foot in Harlem without a proper respectful nod. Future mafia negotiations, from Lucky Luciano to Tommy Lucchese, had to show deference to Harlem's leaders, and the first name always mentioned was Bumpy Johnson. In the black community, the event became a quiet source of inspiration. This wasn't just revenge, this was dignity. Barbers, laundresses, artists, laborers, everyone felt Harlem stood taller after that week, as if a new declaration had been carved into the city's bricks and stones. Harlem doesn't bow. When a young reporter caught up with Bumpy on Lenox Avenue the morning he returned and asked, "Do you have anything to say about what happened?" Bumpy stopped, looked at him with expressionless eyes, the eyes of a man who knew exactly what he'd done and regretted not 1 second. He spoke slowly, each word heavy as iron. "Harlem protects its own. You disrespect black brothers, you pay the price." Then he continued walking. No glance back, no more words. The final image of the story is Bumpy Johnson, the man with the steady gait and long coat, walking through the thin morning mist on Lenox Avenue. The city was strangely peaceful, but everyone knew that peace wasn't luck. It was bought at a very high price, 12 bodies in 7 days, a message written in blood that New York would never forget. Thank you for following the story. If you like this style, please subscribe so you don't miss the next parts. See you in the next chapter, where Harlem still has many untold secrets.